Ladies and gentlemen, I would very much like to welcome you to this opportunity to listen to one of the greatest experts of the works of Ayn Rand, Dr. Yaron Brook from the Aynd Rand-Institute in California. But before he gives his talk and he welcomes discussion and critical questions, I'm going to show you a trailer which was produced out of a film in Italy, and that film was made from the very novel that we are now celebrating, which is We the Living by Ayn Rand. So I'm just going to show you for 4 minutes the trailer, and after that Dr. Brook is going to speak.
Ma tu guardi sempre le persone come se volessi vedere quello che hanno dentro.
Qualche volta.
Io non lo farei se fossi in te. Meno conosci la gente, meglio starai. A meno che tu non abbia nervi forti e stomaco forte.
Io.
Gambe forti.
E gambe forti. Quando tutto sarà passato e le tracce del bolscevismo saranno state disinfettate dalla storia, quest'inno sarà una magnifica marcia funebre. La marcia funebre dell'illusione rossa.
Sciocca. Cosa state dicendo?
Quanto vi pagano per andare in giro a spiare?
Lo sapete qual è il posto per le ragazze come voi?
Sì, dove uomini come voi non potrebbero entrare nemmeno dalla porta di servizio.
Vedo che siete nuova qui. Dovreste essere più prudente.
Abito al 4º piano e le scale sono rotte e sdrucciolevoli. Siate prudente voi quando verrete ad arrestarmi.
Ma siete coraggiosa o solamente stupida?
Lascio a voi di scoprirlo. Io non sapevo.
Non volevo che sapeste. Ho cercato di starvi lontano e di vincervi. Ho anche pensato che avrei potuto arrestarvi, portarvi dove volevo e prendervi. Non sapete quello che avete fatto di me. Giorni fa ho perquisito una casa, c'era una donna. E abbiamo trovato addosso dei documenti. Si dibatteva sul pavimento nella sua camicia da notte chiedendo grazia. Ho pensato a voi lì, sul pavimento, nella vostra camicia da notte, chiedendo pietà, come io ne ho chiesto a voi per tanti mesi. Ebbene, le risi in faccia e le diedi un calcio.
Devo lasciare la Russia prima che mi trovi. Parto stanotte con un battello che fa il contrabbando. Contrabbando di carne umana. Sai cosa stiamo abbandonando? Una galera, Kíra. Un'immensa galera coperta di neve e macchiata di sangue. Dove si è condannato a soffrire per scontare una sola pena. Quella di aver avuto la sfortuna di nascere.
I must add to this that I have read the book closely, and I must say that Kíra, the main hero of the book, in the film, the person that the actress that plays her looks precisely the way you would think she does, and it is very well done. This Italian film, which was shot during the Second World War without the knowledge of Ayn Rand, and it's quite a story how then it was brought into life and remade by the followers of Ayn Rand in the United States. But I'm not going to lengthen on this or say anything more about this, but I would like to ask Dr. Yaron Brook to tell us something about Ayn Rand, self-love, and capitalism.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Let's see. This is good. I don't think I need it. Do I need a microphone? You guys can hear me in the back, right? So thank you. Thank you, Hannes. It's a great pleasure to be here, and it's particularly wonderful to see the books. I guess they're not here in front of me. But the books in print, Ayn Rand's books in print, and in particular, We the Living. I would second the recommendation of the movie. I think it's the best movie based on an Ayn Rand book that was made. I think it's better than The Fountainhead, which Ayn Rand was involved in making. This one she knew nothing about. And yet it was made in Italy, as Hannes said, during the war. Mussolini allowed it because he figured it was an anti-communism movie, and that would be fine, and he let it run for a week. And then they realized that it wasn't an anti-communism movie. What the movie was really about was an anti-totalitarianism movie, and applied to the fascist regime of Italy as much as it did to communism. They pulled it off the screens, they burnt every copy they could find, and destroyed the movie. And it turned out that one copy survived, and that one copy was rediscovered in the 1960s, brought to the United States. Ayn Rand saw it, she loved it. The actors really physically, and I think just the dialogue, everything is a great representation of what the book is about. So I highly recommend the movie. I highly recommend the book. I can't recommend the translation, but Hannes tells me it's excellent. So I can't evaluate it independently, but I'm sure it's fantastic. And of course, it's so support the book, buy it, give it to your friends, get the word out there. Of all of Ayn Rand's novels, We the Living is the most personal. It's really almost autobiographical. Ayn Rand was born in 1905 in Russia. She witnessed the start of the Russian Revolution from their balcony. They lived in St. Petersburg on the famous square where the revolution begins. She witnessed the start of the Russian Revolution, lives through the civil war that is in Russia during the early days, and lives through what happened during the revolution, just as Kíra in the novel does. I won't tell you how the novel ends, but it ends differently than Ayn Rand's real life, because in real life, Ayn Rand manages to escape. She escapes to the US in the late 1920s. There's a small window in which Lenin allows students to leave for particular projects and go and study in the US or do a project in the US, and with the idea that they come back. She applies to do something on American movies. She gets a letter from cousins she has in Chicago, and she manages to leave and to go to the United States. She arrives there with nothing. She lives in Chicago for a little while, but then goes to Hollywood. And starts off again with nothing. Working in the back lot, in the studio, in the wardrobe department of Hollywood studios, and slowly works up, learns the language, learns English enough to be able to write scripts. Her dream is to become a script writer. She moves up in the system and becomes a script writer in Hollywood. She evaluates scripts, she writes scripts, and of course, We the Living is the first novel she writes in the US. It's not very successful. It comes out in the 1930s, and nobody wants to believe the depiction of the Soviet Union. The intelligentsia of the time in the 1930s, particularly on the East Coast, particularly in New York, are very enamored with communism. They think communism is this ideal. They don't want to believe the story of this, that this is the life under communism as depicted in We the Living. So It's a critical failure. It's a commercial failure. It does not do well. Her second book that she brings out, which is Anthem, a short little book, does not find a publisher in the U.S. It's actually published in the UK, in England. In the late 1930s, actually a couple of years before 1984 is published. And there's good reason to believe that George Orwell read Anthem before he wrote 1984. And it's a good, you know, as an English teachers like to put those two books together because there's a lot of they're both about dystopias and about the portrayal of dystopia. And there's a lot of similarities and a lot of fundamental, crucial differences between the two books that are really interesting. Of course, Rand then writes The Fountainhead, which comes out in 1945. And The Fountainhead is rejected by 12 publishers before it is finally sees print. The publisher that does publish The Fountainhead publishes very few copies of it because they don't think it'll do that well. It becomes a word-of-mouth bestseller. And this is the first real substantial commercial success Ayn Rand has in the US. She does very well. It becomes a bestseller, and it still to this day sells more copies, or as many copies, as it did in the 40s and 50s. It sells well over 100,000 copies pretty much every single year in the United States, and is being translated into dozens of languages, including, of course, Icelandic. So it's become a real classic novel, if you will, particularly in the US, but all over the world. 1957, Ayn Rand publishes Atlas Shrugged. By this point, publishers are competing to get the right to publish the novel because they saw what Fountainhead did. Atlas Shrugged becomes an instant bestseller, and of course today sells many, many multiples of what it sold back then. So in its early years, when it was up there in the New York Times bestseller list, Atlas Shrugged sold about 100,000 copies. For years, it sold over 100,000. In the 2000s, it sold about 200,000 copies. And in 2009, it sold 500,000 copies. And it's been somewhere between 300,000 and up since 2009. So I like to say that the best thing for Atlas Shrugged that ever happened was the election of Obama, because since Obama was elected, Atlas Shrugged has sold 2 million copies. Now for 56-year-old book, that is amazing. There is no other book, you know, that has that kind of trajectory in terms of sales after publication and after the author's dead, for it to just skyrocket like that and maintain a level of sales as it has in the last few years. It is truly unprecedented in all of the history of publishing. Post-1957, Ayn Rand dedicated herself to nonfiction. She wrote lots of essays. Some of those essays have been put into books. The Virtue of Selfishness, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, and many others, and those are all available in English. Some of them being translated into other languages. But I highly recommend those who are interested in more of her philosophy to read some of those books. So I want to take a little bit of time to talk about her philosophy. And I'll just say, Rand died in 1982. The Ayn Rand Institute, which I run, was founded in 1985. I've been involved. I've been there since 2000. But let's talk a little bit about kind of her ideas. The title of this talk was something about self-love, so I'd like to talk a little bit about that. And then I'd really like to open it up and answer your questions, because that's always more interesting, and to engage with what interests you about Ayn Rand, and maybe what you find, what you think is challenging about her, or how you would want to challenge some of her ideas. But let's start really with We the Living, because I think it's a good beginning to segment into the idea of self-interest, into the idea of self-love or selfishness. Because what Ayn Rand does in We the Living is she depicts what happens to the individual. What happens to the individual under totalitarianism. She depicts individuals who have different life aspirations, who have different values, and what totalitarianism does to them. How it destroys their life. How it makes it impossible for them to live. And while I might be giving away the ending of the book, every one of the lead characters dies in We the Living in some way or another. So let me leave it at that, right? In some way or another. They die spiritually or they die physically. But everybody in the book, at the end of the book, dies because life is impossible under totalitarianism. Life is unbearable, is intolerable, and ultimately impossible. But to understand this, one needs to understand what Ayn Rand views as human life. What is it to her to say man's life or human life? Because to her, life is not just about the biology of it. It's not about having cells that are functioning. As a biological entity, one can survive almost anything. It is not man as a physical being, man as a biological, material that authoritarianism suppresses and destroys. Ayn Rand has a particular view of what man is and what man is capable of and what his purpose should be. And that purpose is what is destroyed. So for Ayn Rand, the question of morality, the question of ethics, the question of what kind of life one should live, how one should live one's life, arises from the decision, if you will, the choice that we all face to live. And that is a choice. All of us face a choice between life and death. And at every decision point, ultimately, the ultimate choice that is available to us is between existence and non-existence. Now, no other being, in a sense, faces this choice. They're all programmed to choose existence. They don't literally have to make a decision about it. And then, of course, most of the matter in our world, at least, I won't say in the universe because we don't know, is inanimate. It does not exist as a living entity. Okay? So life is something we choose. For Ayn Rand, morality and ethics is then the question of what is required, what is necessary to live. What is required, what is necessary for us as human beings, the particular biological entity that is human, to live and ultimately to thrive. What is it that allows human beings? What is unique to human beings? What is our means of survival? What is our means by which we thrive? Okay. And this is what to Rand life really means. Because what kind of biological entity are we? What is it about us that is unique, that allows us to survive? You know, I often ask my audiences to think about this point because people don't think about it. They don't think about what is it unique to human beings. And indeed, we get all kinds. If you ask anthropologists, you get all kinds of answers. You know, thumbs, that's what makes us unique. You know, other animals don't have thumbs. But is that true, right? Is it anything like that? Is it anything physical like that? What is it that makes human beings different? What is it that allows us to survive in a climate and an environment like Iceland here, right? Because as a biological species, we don't have a chance out there, right? We're pretty pathetic, right? I mean, we're slow, we're weak, we don't have fur, we have to have clothes in order to survive out there, and pretty warm clothes. We have to build shelters. How many of you have the gene to build a shelter? You know, like birds do. I don't. You put me out there, I don't know what I would do. Right? We are no match for a saber-toothed tiger. We're no match. I mean, try running down a buffalo, biting into it and eating it. We can't do it. We can't. From a pure physical, material perspective, we are not suited for this world. So what is it that allows us to thrive and achieve and succeed? And, you know, and we've clearly succeeded, right? It's nice and warm in here, which is a good sign of success. What is it that allows human beings to survive, to thrive, to be successful? It's our ability to reason. It's our minds. It's our ability to think, to see reality as it is, to learn to understand it, to integrate the facts from it, to use logic, to discover new truths, to figure stuff out. And we've had to figure everything out, from building shelter, to creating clothes, to creating agriculture. Everything that human beings have today and have had throughout our history is a product of our minds. Nothing comes to us other than through here, other than through the use of our reason. So what makes us unique, what makes us human, what makes it possible for us to live and to thrive and to succeed is our reason, is our mind, is our rationality. We are, as Aristotle said, the rational animal. So for Rand, to live is to think. To live is to reason. To live is to use what's here. And what is the enemy of thought, of reason, of rationality? What is the enemy of the human mind? What makes it impossible for us to discover new truth, to build on new truths, to expand, to grow? What makes it impossible for you to act based on your judgment, on your thinking, on your reason, on your rational, on the logic? It's force. It's a gun. It's a knife. It's a fist. Somebody sticks a gun to the back of your head and says, from now on, 2 + 2 = 5. And if you don't act as if 2 + 2 = 5, I will shoot you. Can you build a bridge? Can you program a computer? Can you build a house? You're dead. It doesn't matter what goes on inside here. You can't manifest it in reality because you get that bullet in the head. Force is the destroyer of our capacity to think. Force is the destroyer of our capacity to live. Coercion is the anti-life because it is fundamentally anti-reason. It's anti-our tool of survival. We the Living demonstrates this beautifully. Every action, every idea that Kíra or one of the other heroes have in order to make their life better, to further their life, to try to build something, to try to create something, try to make something, is destroyed by force, is destroyed by other people. So at some point, what happens to Andre, those of you who've read the book, at some point they stop thinking because there's no point. They either go along with the crowd, they either go along, which is what the communists want them to do, right? They want them to just flow with the proletariat. Or they give up and they become complete cynics, or they put a bullet through their head, or their life is destroyed in one way or another. They cannot both think and live under coercion. Okay? And this theme of force versus the mind, force versus the mind, is a crucial theme that flows throughout Ayn Rand's books. And it's a crucial theme that explains the bridge between Ayn Rand's ethical theory and Ayn Rand's political theory. Okay. So if Ayn Rand reasoned, the mind is how we live. It is human life. So for her, ethics tells you that the most important value, the thing to strive towards if you want a good life, if you want self-love, if you care about yourself, if you're selfish, the most important thing you could do in life is think. So for her, the cardinal value, the most important value is reason. And you need to think about something. You need a purpose in life. So the second cardinal value is purpose. You need to act. You need to act to make your life better. You need purpose. For most of us, that purpose is a career, something we work towards. Ow. And you need to be able to have, in order to act, in order to reason, in order to benefit from this life, you also need to have self-esteem. You need to be convinced that you are worthy, that you are good, that you are competent, that you are capable. So for her, those are the three cardinal values that we should all strive towards. Reason, purpose, self-esteem. That is what selfishness for Ayn Rand means. And this again to contrast with what our popular, what is the popular view of selfishness? When you say to the kid in the schoolyard, you're being selfish, do you mean, oh, you're trying to take care of yourself, which is what the literary meaning of selfish means, taking care of self, right? By following reason, purpose, and self-esteem, is that what we mean in the schoolyard? Now, what do we mean? You're being selfish means in the common usage, you are being a jerk. You're an SOB. You're backstabbing. You're lying. You're cheating. You're a bad person. Because we take selfishness, the common perspective of selfishness is exploiting other people, doing whatever you feel like doing whatever feels good in the moment. The common perception of selfishness is emotionalist. It's whim worshipping, and it's exploitative. It's exploiting of other people. And why is that? Why, historically, have we developed a concept of selfishness, taking care of self, that involves exploitation of other people and whim worshipping and doing whatever you feel like it? Why is that the way we perceived selfishness? It's because we've been taught that goodness is what? Somebody said so? Yeah, goodness is being selfless. Goodness is taking care of others first, thinking of yourself last. Auguste Comte, the French philosopher who coined the term altruism, was the first one to coin the term altruism, didn't mean by altruism being nice to people, being kind, opening doors, being charitable. It's not what he meant. When he talks about altruism, he talks about the idea of placing your life at the service of others. That your moral purpose in life is to serve others. That if you think of helping somebody else, that you will feel better because you helped them, not moral. It's not moral because you thought about yourself. It has to be pure for others. That's the original kind of conception of altruism. The philosophical conception of altruism. It's about self-sacrifice, self-denial. It's about the repression of self. Now, this is the people who believe in this morality, the morality that says that your life is meaningless. Your life is only got meaning in the sense that it serves other people's lives, right? Which is a kind of an infinite, kind of a ridiculous infinite regression if you really think about it logically. You know, who's the end result, right? If we're all sacrificing to each other, where does it all end, right? But what would they want you to believe about the alternative? Because most people, how many people are really committed to being selfless? One. I don't know if there's anybody else. There's always one in the room. I feel sorry for you. But I do. But nobody actually lives it. Literally nobody actually lives it. Because you cannot live it. Most people, you know, think of themselves most of the time. They live their life and then they appease this moral guilt that they have by, you know, giving a little bit to charity or voting for a leftist political party. Or, I'm serious. I think most people vote for a leftist political party out of a sense of guilt, not out of any ideological commitment. But because it's consistent with their morality. So people don't really want to be selfless. So we have to destroy the alternative for them. We have to make clear to them that there is no alternative but to be altruistic. That anything other than being altruistic is being nasty, mean, exploitative, lying, and cheating. So we're presented in morality, in conventional morality, with basically only two alternatives in life. You can be selfless, or you can be a brute. You can sacrifice yourself to other people, or you can have other people sacrifice to you. And we term that selfish, and those are the two alternatives. And if those are the only alternatives in morality that we have, then nobody wants to be a brute. I mean, a few do, and they usually are. We call those political leaders, right? Right? They want you to sacrifice to them. They rise up. But most people don't want to be brutes. They don't want other people sacrificing to them. They don't want to be lying, stealing, cheating SOBs. So the only morality they can adopt is a morality of selflessness, of altruism. That's the alternatives presented. Rand challenges that. Rand throws that dichotomy out. She says, why? Why is my life not as worthy as your life? And why does my life, if I care about my life, require me to lie, steal, and cheat and use you and exploit you? My life's about reason, purpose, self-esteem. None of those involve exploitation. Quite the contrary. If you follow the logic, they all involve trade to mutual benefit. I want you to thrive because by you thriving, I thrive. And trade is the way human beings relate to one another. Not through exploitation, not me exploiting, sacrificing myself to you, or me expecting you to sacrifice to me. So for her, there's a new morality, a morality of self-interest, of rational self-interest, rational selfishness, based on reason, based on man as a rational animal and all that that means, and all that a human being can achieve if he is a rational animal. And she talks about what kind of virtues are consistent with the values of reason, purpose, self-esteem. What kind of virtues are actions in morality? What kind of actions should we engage in if we're going to live life to the fullest, if we're going to be truly selfish human beings, truly self-interested human beings? Well, think rationally. Right? We should be honest. Now, why should we be honest? Why did somebody who's committed to his own life, committed to his own self-interest, be honest? Well, first and foremost, honesty means consistent with reality. Now, isn't that just being rational? Because if you don't view reality as it is, if you don't recognize it as it is, how can you be rational? Isn't the first step to being rational accepting the facts as they are? And if you don't, what happens? There's a term in computers, garbage in, garbage out. You put garbage in here, what are your conclusions going to be? Garbage. And I don't care what happens inside. If you put in false facts, you get in false conclusions. So the first thing is it's crucial to be honest to yourself, to deal with facts, to deal with truths. And if that's true of you, that's true of other people. All you're doing is doing damage to yourself by deceiving, by lying. You're not helping yourself, you're damaging yourself. And you can see this. I mean, this is not that hard for people to understand, I think, because to some extent, my guess is going to be that everybody in this room has lied at some point in life. And if you're honest about it, I think you'd agree with me that it sucks. It's bad. It doesn't work. It's a really lousy strategy. If you do it in business often enough, what happens? Is anybody going to work with you? Is anybody going to trade with you? If you do it to your wife often enough, how long are you going to stay married? Lying doesn't work. It always backfires. And it's hard. It's self-destructive. I mean, I'm reaching the age where I can barely remember what I did last week. Right? It takes real mental effort to think back and figure out what I actually did. Right? If I lie about it, instead of just remembering what I did last week, I now have to remember the lie as well. But it doesn't end there. I have to remember who I told the lie to and who I told the truth to, right? And then I have to remember why I told them the lie. What was my motivation? What was I trying to achieve? I mean, it's way too complicated for me. It's like the craziest strategy ever for human success, and indeed it isn't a strategy for human success. It's a strategy for human failure and destruction. Just ask Bernie Madoff. I mean, there's your poster child for self-destruction. And I'm not even talking about after he was caught. I'm talking about before he was caught. He lived a pathetic, miserable, horrific life because he couldn't do anything real. Everything was a fake. Everything was a lie. He couldn't talk to people. He couldn't look them in the eye. He couldn't sleep at night because he was worried to be being caught. Not caught by the police, but caught by his best friends and caught by his family. Everybody know who Bernie Madoff is? The pyramid scheme guy who stole all the money from his friends. So, for example, honesty is a strategy for being selfish. Dishonesty is a strategy for self-destruction. Okay. So, if you love yourself, if you care about yourself, you're rational, you don't lie. Right? And particularly to yourself or to anybody else. If you care about yourself, you have integrity. Because what does it mean to hold ideas and not execute on them? There is no dichotomy between reality and your mind. What's the point of having rational thoughts and using reason if you don't apply it in life? If you don't act based on those thoughts and based on those ideas? Rand advocates for being independent. Why independence? Well, who reasons? Who uses their mind? Who thinks? Individuals think. Is there group think? Anybody ever experienced collective consciousness? There is no consciousness floating up here above our heads. There is no collective thinking. There is no collective reason. There is no collective mind. There is no collective, indeed. The collective is a myth. All the collective is a bunch of individuals. And we can help each other think. We can stimulate thought in one another. We can get into a room and brainstorm and you know, push each other. Yeah, we can do that. But we, each one of us, as an individual, has to think. Otherwise, no thought happens. There's no collective brain. So whose responsibility is it to do your thinking? It's yours. It's your mind, your reason, your life. Being independent means thinking for yourself. It doesn't mean going out into the wilderness and living by yourself, right, and not interacting with anybody. That's not independence. That's stupid, for the most part. Right? It means thinking for yourself, coming to conclusions yourself, you know, dealing with experts who know more than you, but doing it in a conscious, thoughtful, reasonable way, not just blanking out and accepting whatever people want you to think, whatever people tell you to do. Rand's morality requires one to be productive, to take care of oneself, to work, to produce, to build, to make. And she would argue that most of our self-esteem comes from the process the process and the knowledge that we can take care of ourselves, that we are fit in this world to survive, to use our mind in a way that produces the material stuff that we need in order to live and to live well. You know, one of the great tragedies of the welfare state, bring in a little bit of politics to wake you up. One of the great tragedies of the welfare state is that we destroy the capacity of those who receive welfare to attain self-esteem. Because when you receive a check for nothing, for just being alive, you do not have the opportunity now to work, to build, to create, to gain the confidence that you can take care of yourself. In America, welfare now has institutionalized people into poverty. Generations of people into poverty. Because you never learn the skill of working, and you never gain the self-esteem and, as a consequence, the happiness that comes from working. I mean, we spend most of our waking hours at work. We might talk up family. We might talk, oh, family is the most important thing. But if you watch people's behavior, it's not your most important thing. The most important thing to you is the work that you do, the productive work that you do. It's where you spend most of your time, most of your energy, most of your brain power, and it's where you get most of your self-esteem. It's where you set challenges, where you attain them, where you succeed. When you deprive somebody of work, when you deprive somebody of a career, as I think we do in the welfare state, you destroy their ability to have self-esteem and therefore to be happy as human beings. The biggest victims of the state, of the welfare state, are the poor, in particular the ambitious poor. The poor who never want to work, who don't care, who are lazy. To them, it's fine, right? But if you're ambitious and poor, the state, through the welfare state, destroys you. And that's the biggest tragedy of all. So Rand's, again, this idea of self-interest is an idea of reason, rationality, right? Honesty, independence, integrity, productiveness. And at the end of the day, a commitment to be the best that you can be. A commitment to take morality seriously. To strive to be morally perfect. To be rational, independent, have honesty and so on. And she calls that pride, following Aristotle, right? Pride is the, for Aristotle, pride is the queen of all virtues. Pride is that commitment to your own life. It's a commitment to having a great life. It's a commitment to virtue. It's a commitment to morality. It's a commitment to yourself. So Rand's moral code is a revolutionary moral code. It's certainly in modern times. I think the only comparison is Aristotle's. Aristotle, again, is focused on your own success, your own life, your eudaimonia, right? In Greek, eudaimonia, flourishing or happiness. Rand follows that. She says, yes, they don't agree on the particular virtues, but they agree on the outcome. The outcome is flourishing, individual flourishing. What leads to that flourishing? Now, I'll just touch on the politics, and then we'll open it up to the questions. So, individuals who are seeking reason, who are seeking to make their lives the best life that they can be, who are independent, who believe that they need to do thinking for themselves. And sometimes you're going to be wrong. Rationality does not mean being right. Rationality is about the process. So, individuals committed to reality and to reason, to rationality, what kind of world do they want to live in? What kind of world, when they get together with other people, do they want to live in? What do they want to make sure doesn't exist, is not imposed on them? Well, we talked about this a minute ago. What they want to be free of is coercion. What they want to be free of is other people telling them what to think and what to do. And if they disagree, forcing it on them. Right? It's fine to disagree. We're going to disagree on a lot of things. Right? But it's when you coerce me to doing what you want me to do, that's when you cross the line. It's coercion that is the enemy of the individual. It's coercion that's the enemy of reason. Coercion, the enemy of independence. And therefore, coercion is the enemy of virtue. So we want a political system, we want to create a political system that eliminates coercion from human life. So when we get in together in a group, nobody is allowed to coerce anybody else. That's the principle of social interaction for Ayn Rand. There's a term that defines this, a term from the Enlightenment that defines this, and it's called individual rights. Individual rights are the recognition that none of us should be coerced, that we all have the freedom to pursue the actions necessary to achieve our life. That's what rights are, freedoms. Freedoms of action. Action in pursuit of life. In a sense, there's only one right, right? And that is the right to life of the individual. Government is instituted for only one purpose: to protect those rights. In other words, to protect freedom, to protect you from other people who might try to coerce you, to protect you from crooks and criminals and fraudsters and murderers and so on, terrorists, invaders. But that's it. To arbitrate disputes. But government has no role other than that, because any other role that it takes on beyond that becomes a coercive role. Any other role that it takes beyond that, redistribution of wealth, for example, taking from some and giving to others. Well, how do you take from some? Only through coercion. Otherwise, they would voluntarily give to others. Or regulatory, right? Banks have to have a capital ratio of X by law, right? That's coercion. What if a bank doesn't want to have that? What if its shareholders don't want it, its depositors agree, and everybody who does business with them don't think 20% is the right ratio? It should be, you know, they're willing to do business at 15. You as a government are coercing them, forcing them to be at 20, even though everybody agrees and there's no fraud being involved. Right? So the regulatory state, the entitlement state, are by definition coercive states. Ayn Rand objects to them, not because of an economic argument, although we can all make an economic argument, or most of us can make an economic argument why the government shouldn't be doing this, it doesn't work efficiently, it's not. But she makes the argument, not that argument, she makes the argument that it's wrong for the government to coerce regulations on banking because it's bad for the individual. Every individual who's committed to reason at least, is worse off because the government is regulating X, whatever that X would be. She says in one of her essays that she was an advocate for capitalism because she's an advocate for self-interest, because she's an advocate for selfishness. And she's an advocate for self-interest because she's an advocate for reason. So for her, everything boils down to the individual's life, to commitment to making his life the best that it can be through the use of reason. That's what self-interest means to her. That's what selfishness means to her. That's what self-love means to her. It's that focus on reason in pursuit of the best life that you can live. And freedom, political freedom, is the only political system consistent with individuals living such a life. Thank you.
Well, we are all very grateful to Dr. Yaron Brook for his eloquent analysis and description of Ayn Rand's philosophy. He has brought up many interesting points. I just wanted to make two minor points myself, which is that Maria here, she has a daughter that she actually named after Kíra Argúnova, the heroine of the novel, which is an interesting thing. I actually encouraged you to bring her with you, but you were not able to, obviously. The other thing that I wanted to make just a short observation on myself before I give the floor to questions and answers, which I'm not going to direct because you just take the answers in this. You made a very interesting analysis of the concept of pride, which is of course an Aristotelian concept. It occurred to me that in one way the Icelandic language is richer than the English one, because in Icelandic we make a distinction between stolt and the dramb. And it is a dramb, which is one of the 7 deadly sins, and that's something which has a bad order to it in Icelandic. But stolt is something which is very good in Icelandic and commendable. So I think that I was trying to seek for an English word that would capture that stolt, that we have taken pride into one's works and so on. But I couldn't really find any English expression that would make this distinction. But having said this, I would like to give the floor to people and you just ask Yaron questions. Perhaps you would like to ask him something about how he turned from socialism by reading Rand, or about the novels and about her very interesting life, her personality, whether or not care for the weak and oppressed, and so on. All of those questions and the criticisms that people have been making of Ms. Rand. So please go ahead, and you have seen from this speech that Dr. Brook relishes critical questions and give and take this discussion.
Maybe I should start.
Go ahead.
I would like to have you explain Ayn Rand's philosophy about charity work. You said that it's in your own self-interest to not steal and not lie and so on because we quote. But charity work, I mean, you can easily do away, not do any kind of charity work. So what's her take on that?
So her view is, first of all, that it's not an important issue. Charity, exists, it's helpful, but it's not a big deal. Not in a free society. In a free society, capitalism produces more jobs than there are people. Every example, when you free up markets, you can see this. That's why massive numbers of immigrants flow into capitalist countries, because there's plenty of work. So most people should be able to survive and be successful by working. And indeed, the number of people who you would argue can't work, whether it's mental problems or physical problems, just can't work, is a fraction of a percent. Less than 1%, a fraction of that, right? So it's a tiny little issue. Everybody else should work. They don't need charity. They don't need help. They just need a job, and they get a job because jobs are being produced because capitalists are self-interested in trying to make money, and they make money by creating jobs and making money off of the workers, right? So what happens to those fractions? Well, there are two issues with charity. One other type of person. There's some people who, either born or for some reason cannot work. And then there are other people who have accidents. Something happens to you, house burns down, you get into an accident, and for a while you can't take care of yourself, and you haven't saved up enough money or whatever. And she would argue that charity is completely appropriate in those situations. We value other human beings. Other human beings are of value to us. And for some people, they're of greater value. For example, family members. The more distant you are, of course, the less value it is, because the ultimate is to your life. But that every human being has some value to you. And therefore, if somebody has an accident by no fault of their own, and they don't have the money or they can't take care of themselves, people will jump in to help in a free society and will provide charity. Okay? So she believed that charity would exist, that charity was a positive thing if done right, right? She never said anything against charity. All she said was, what's the big deal? Why are we getting so upset, all riled up about charity, when the real issue is creating, is production. It's creating those jobs. So she wasn't against charity. She gave to charity, small amounts, but she gave to charity during her life. For example, when she first came to Hollywood, I think she stayed at and this is just my memory and I might be wrong, but I think she stayed at kind of a place where a lot of people were trying to break into Hollywood, women. It was just a women's kind of home, and she stayed there, right? And it was a non-for-profit. There was funded through charitable activities. And later, when she had money, she donated there because she had benefited from it. She saw that it was helping people who were trying to work, who are not trying to be lazy, right? Trying to get away from work, and therefore she supported their work. She wrote about this. There's a letter, I think, in the letters book about it. So there's nothing against charity. This is the problem, though. So a few years ago, I went to a lunch that was a Lifetime Achievement Award for businessmen. Right? And they get these nice awards, nice plaques. And so they read these very long bios. There were about 5 businessmen who got these awards, and they read long bios. And in the bios, they spent a minute and a half on the business achievement and 9-10 minutes on the community service and charity that they gave. Now that's nuts. That is morally obscene, morally inverted, and horrific, right? These people worked hard to build a business, to create a life for themselves and for their family. And by the way, their employees benefited from it. Consumers benefited from it. The community benefited from it. The world benefited from it. Everybody benefited from it. But the focus was on making their life the best life they could be. That should be what they get the award for. That should be the focus of our moral thumbs up to them. The fact that they do community service and charity, nice. I'm not going to say anything negative about it. But that's not where you get your moral stars, right? Your moral good check marks. It does not come from charity. It comes from working. It comes from creating a life. It comes from building a life. It comes from being rational and using your reason. Charity's nice, it's fine, but it's a sideshow. It's not the essence of your life. And it's amazing to me that it's always the first question, right? Because of the culture we live in. And I like to ask people, what helps poor people more? Business or charity? I mean, it's not even close, guys. It's not even close. How many people were poor 250 years ago? How many people were poor by any standard of poverty? How many people, what percentage of the population was poor 250 years ago? 95, 98%? Everybody. There was few aristocrats that lived it up. Everybody else was poor. And how did the aristocrats become rich? They stole and exploited from everybody else. For thousands and thousands of years, this is the case. We don't have a marker here, but there's this beautiful graph, right, of wealth per capita. You know, wealth per capita 10,000 years ago. Starts somewhere here, right, and it's flat. This is time. And it continues to be flat all the way until about 250 years ago. And then suddenly it goes like that. And all these 95% of the people who are poor suddenly become a lot less poor. And most of them, almost all of them, are not poor anymore. Because in America, 85% of all poor people have air conditioning. Over 90% of all poor people have cell phones. Most of them smart cell phones, you know, these kind of cell phones. They have automobiles. They're not poor in the sense of 250 years ago when life expectancy was 40 and they had a slave away at subsistence farming and their kids died at childbirth or before the age of 10. Nobody's poor by that standard anymore, in America at least, right? So what has caused this? What has caused this incredible benefit to poor people? Charity? The aristocrats suddenly became charitable and handed out all their money? That's a zero-sum game. Charity is a zero-sum game. There's not enough wealth to explain it. What explains it is business. What explains it is production. What explains it is capitalism. What explains it is the Industrial Revolution. That's what raised people out of poverty. Nothing has been better for the human race. Nothing has been better for the human race than capitalism. Yes.
Hi, I'm Victor.
Hi, Victor.
Scientist here. I'd like to thank you for your interesting presentation. First of all, I'd like to clarify on my hand raising earlier. I would like to say that I strive to be both selfless and selfish in life. And I find it interesting that Ayn Rand pointed to the dichotomy of either being self-sacrificing altruist via August Comte or totally selfish, and asked, why is my life not as important as others? I would like to ask her or you then, as her representative here, why are other people's lives not as important to you as your own, and can you not take care of others and yourself at the same time? Is it not compatible? Second of all, when you say the state's only purpose is to protect us from coercion of others, but they also have to protect the fundamental right of life, then I would like to ask how the human concept of private property plays into that. For example, when someone has said that this land is mine and I am perhaps dying out of hunger, I want to eat the food there, is the state's responsibility to protect the private property of the other individual or my right to life? And thirdly, do you not differentiate between different sorts of coercion in evaluating its legitimacy? That is, the totalitarianism of putting a gun against your head and saying that 2 + 2 is 5 versus regulating the banking system.
Okay. So let me start with I encourage you to ask me one at a time because I have a hard time, as I told you, remembering anything. So 3 questions hard for me to
That's
hold.
a short version.
The first one was, why is there conflict between, in a sense, being selfish and being selfless? Isn't somebody else's life as valuable to me as my own life? And the answer is clearly no. I don't love my neighbor as much as I love myself. And I don't think any of you do. I think if you think you do, you're lying to yourself. And I'll give you the ultimate test. Let me finish. I'll give you the ultimate test. There's a burning house. Your kids are in one room. Your neighbor's kids are in the other. Who do you rescue first? You can only rescue one. You rescue your own. If you don't, you're a monster. If you don't, you're a monster.
What if you're choosing between yourself and your children?
Let me get to that. Okay? That's much harder. Much harder, but it's because they're your children. Because you didn't give me the neighbor's children, because that choice is easy. But it's your children, it makes it hard. But let's first take you and a stranger, right? Or you and the neighbor. You don't love your neighbor like yourself, and you shouldn't. Your neighbor's not you. Right? It's you here, right? It doesn't mean you hate your neighbor. It doesn't mean you wouldn't help your neighbor. It doesn't mean if he's in trouble, you don't help him put out the fire. It doesn't mean you don't risk your life for him, to some extent. But it means that his life is not exactly the same, worth as much as it is to you. Now, the more you love your neighbor, let's say she's a woman and you really fall in love with her, or a man and you fall in love with her, whatever, right? The more you care about them, then the more you're willing to trade with them, the more you're willing to give, because the more you're going to get back. The more you're willing to risk your life, the more you're willing to help out, because they are more of a value to you. But the standard is you, because for 2 reasons. It's your choice to live, your responsibility over your life. It's your ability here to live. It's you. So nothing she said doesn't mean you don't help people, you don't risk your life for them, all of that. It just means that the standard is always your life. So that's why it's tricky when it's your children. And you love them. And then what do you do if the child is drowning, right? And most parents, I think, are willing, most rational parents, you know, are willing to jump in and save the kid even at the expense of their own life, because they wouldn't want, they love their children so much, I hope, right? I do at least, so much that they wouldn't want to live in a world where that child wasn't there. In a world where they could have saved the child and didn't. Right? So it's because that child is so important to them, right? And this goes to soldiers, for example. Why would a soldier risk his life to fight for his country? Well, I don't think they should for most countries. But if it's a free country, and they're fighting for freedom, then they wouldn't want to live in a world where the enemy wins. They're fighting for their life, for their freedom, for the value which is freedom and what it means to them. And that's very high, and therefore it means risking your life. It doesn't mean committing suicide. I'm not big on suicide missions. Right? But it does mean willing to risk for a value that's crucial to you. But you are the standard. Okay? So other people are going to be as important to you as your life are going to be your wife and your kids, but pretty much nobody else. Because you don't, parents, if you really, really love them, you know, some people don't love their parents at all. Some people love them a little bit. Some people, you know, it depends. There's no uniform. And it's true about kids as well. Not everybody loves their kids, and not everybody loves their kids equally. I mean, that's reality. And some kids don't deserve to be loved. Some kids are lousy kids. You know, love shouldn't be unconditional. I don't believe in unconditional love. You have to get something, right? I don't believe in sacrifice. Some kids are not worth loving. Some parents are not worth loving. Parents who beat up their kids or abuse their kids, you shouldn't love them, right? So it depends. Second question was, remind me. Yeah, so this is my point about rights. Rights is not, you don't have a right to an end result. You have a right to act. You have a right to act to further your life, which means you have the freedom of action. That's what a right means, freedom of action. Your freedom of action cannot involve disrupting somebody else's freedom of action. So if somebody owns this plot of land, you can go and you can ask him for food. You can beg him for food. You can try to trade with him for food. But you can't take his food away from him. It's his. He has a right to it. You don't have a right to his stuff. So your freedom of action ends when your action disrupts somebody else's rights. The government's job is not to protect you from starvation. The government's job is not to protect your life in that sense. Your government's job is only to protect you from coercion from other people. If your starvation is metaphysical because of the weather, or it's because you've been lazy, or it's because of an accident, right? That's your problem. It is your problem. It only becomes the government's problem if it's a consequence of somebody taking your stuff away from you, if somebody forcing you into a particular situation, if somebody else is coercing you. Now, I believe strongly, going back to the charity issue, that if you are starving because of no fault of your own, accident, people will help you. You don't need the government to help you. You don't need the government to pull out a gun and come around. People are very benevolent in a free society. The freer society, the more benevolent they tend to be. And charity, then that's when charity is called for. That's when charity is appropriate. Okay. Third one, quickly.
Just let me make one interruption because time is passing. I think it's excellent if you answer that question, but then we should transfer the discussion to here outside where they'll be serving white wine. So just answer that question, and then we'll applaud you, and then we'll go.
So remind me what the third question is.
Just about the differentiation between different kinds of coercion, totalitarianism versus fact regulation and so forth.
Yes. So first of all three really, really good questions. So thank you for them, because they're all philosophical questions, which I like. I don't like that kind of. We can get into economics and politics and all that, but these are the more fundamental ones. I don't see a difference. So what is bank regulation? Bank regulation is a gun at the back of somebody's head saying, you shall have capital levels of X. And if you don't, and if doing business well involves different capital requirements than X, right? Regulation of banks or any business is restrictive of people's ability to innovate, to think outside the box, to create new stuff. It puts them in this box that some bureaucrat thought of. Usually the bureaucrat has no knowledge of the field he's regulating, and even if he does, it's a central planning type thing, so he's not connected to the values of the marketplace and what's going on in the marketplace. And indeed, it's no accident, and we could go into the financial crisis and everything, but it's no accident that you get crises where? Big systemic crises. In the most regulated industries they are. It's no accident that you get fraud, deception, bad guys. Always in the most regulated business they are. The freer the business, and in the United States, the distinction you can make, the technology business is relatively free. I mean, it's regulated, 10%, 20% maybe, but 80% free. There's almost no fraud in technology business. And there's a lot of money that changes hands. There's a lot of opportunity. I'm not saying there's no fraud, but there's very little fraud. Right? For the most part, it's an honest business. People make deals in a handshake. It's a phenomenal place to work, and you're creative, and you can build stuff and work stuff, and you can really do stuff in the technology side. Finance, which is heavily regulated. American banks are basically public utilities. 80% government, 20% maybe free, maybe 20%. Lots of fraud, lots of problems, lots of corruptions, and risk-taking that's ridiculous, and failure and disasters, right? And that's not an accident. Even, I'll end with this, even in the early 2000s, there was this flurry of fraud cases in America. I don't know if you remember Enron, and WorldCom, and a few others. And you look at those industries and you say, what industries were they? Enron was in what industry? Energy, in Texas, heavily, heavily regulated. When you watch what's his name, the chairman of the board, I forget his name now, what he used to do on a regular basis, he used to spend most of his time with the Bushes, more time with the Bushes than running the business. Because to be a good energy company, you have to have good political connections. Surprise, surprise, they turned out to be corrupt. WorldCom, telecommunications, incredibly regulated, particularly during the 90s. There was re-regulation, shifting in regulation. You have to be really in with the government. It's not about running a business. It's about who you know and what you know. And if you look at all the businesses where you get these big cases of fraud, It's almost always in heavily regulated businesses, where the people who rise to the top are not spectacular businessmen. What are they? Spectacular schmoozers, spectacular politicians. And if I had to choose who I trust more, a politician or a real businessman, there's no question in my mind. I would always trust a businessman over the politician. Politics is about coercion, force, power. Business is about trading value for value. I'll take trading value for value any day over anybody interested in power and coercion and imposing his will on me. Thank you all.